All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this month's installment of Conscious Conversations, featuring the awesome team of mental health therapists at Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Jonathan Ellsworth, and I'm joined by Katrica, and we're excited to spend this time with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Katrica Hazlett, and today we'll be unpacking the topic of generational trauma. Conscious conversations are intended to educate, uplift, and provide guidance on how to deal with life stressors. Our model here at New is real people helping real people with real problems. And these conversations are an opportunity to have a real talk with our therapist. So let's dive in.
Mm.
Before we discuss generational trauma, we want to first unpack what exactly is trauma. Trauma itself is a response to a devastating event, and it could be something that affects you emotionally, physically, but has negative outcomes. Traumatic events could include abuse, discrimination, natural disasters, racism, and war, just to name a few. Now, generational trauma is trauma that actually is passed down from one generation to the next. In fact, it suggests that although one generation experiences directly, their descendants do not have to experience the trauma directly, but are still, in fact, just as much affected by it.
Yeah, like I know we can talk a little bit more about how generational trauma plays a role and how it manifests from we have sexual assault, sexual abuse, physical harm, mental abuse. We also have slavery, 9/11, massive traumatic events that happen, and how that plays a role in the upbringing of the next generation that comes from that. So, like prime example for me, growing up, I grew up in a family where there was a person in our family who was sexually assaulted growing up and sexual abuse also. And they when they grew up to become their parent, when they grew up to become a parent, the way that they parented was pretty much based off kind of that trauma, off that traumatic event that happened, because it was like, I have to protect my children. I have to protect you guys from the world. I have to protect you from all the hardships that come with it. I have to protect you to make sure that you're safe. And and like, so a lot of that protection became helicoptery, helicopter parents. And and growing up through that, I was frustrated because I'm like, hey, let me grow up, let me be a teenager, let me do all these crazy things. Because like I was like 16, still being like, my friends were like, hey, we're going out. You want to come? And I'm like, I gotta ask my mom. And my mom would be like, who's out there? Who's gonna be there? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? What the parents like? I need to meet the parents. I'm like, I'm 16. You can't keep meeting the parents. Um, and so that was hard because there are a lot of things that um there's a lot of things that come from that, because a lot of times what we never really talk about, like, how that moment of like, okay, if my parents are helicopter parent, how am I going to be a parent? Because I know for me personally, I'm like, I don't want to be that person. And so how does that affect whenever I do become a parent? Like, will I eventually become a helicopter parent because that's what I saw and that's what worked for my parents? Or will it be less? Because I realized my mom parent, or my parents, like, they were strict, but they wasn't as strict as my parents were. So what happens? How does that look when that changes?
Mhm.
So I always feel like that's a big thing when it comes to generational trauma and how that even looks when it comes to parenting. That's one thing that I see that happens sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. That definitely is a way that generational trauma manifests, and and you can see the effects in your life. And
Hmm.
I'm thankful that you shared that with us. So, just talking about for me, generational trauma societally, I can see it in many ways and in many forms. For one thing, it may be that families or communities have PTSD or anxiety or depression issues. In the criminal justice system, we have populations of individuals, maybe Black or Brown populations that are overrepresented. And you have one family member who's in jail, and then you have a child who goes through that experience and has to learn to function missing a parent, or a function just in a situation throughout obstacles where they're having to relearn that parent relationship and how to survive. Also, there may be social disparities where families may struggle with poverty, with lack of education, access,
Hmm.
employment opportunities. And for a child seeing that for firsthand, that can be difficult, but also a family and relationship dynamics where there may be unhealthy parenting patterns that have been modeled as far as neglect or abuse, and or just simply models of dysfunction, whereas communication is not where um, um, the families would like it to be.
Yeah.
Okay. And for me personally, when I think about my own experience with generational trauma, I think about how my upbringing, my mom struggled with substance abuse addiction issues, and so for me as a child, being privy to that, it always created a lot of anxiety and fear in me regarding just substances in general. For me, I even to today, if something is prescribed to me that's greater than Tylenol, then it's going to give me pause because I'm always in the back of my head, having that little voice is saying, is this going to lead to addiction?
Hmm.
Is this going to create the situation that I was accustomed to growing up?
Yeah.
But also just thinking of things such as, what addiction brought on as far as um, housing disparities, or, homelessness, or just food insecurity. So in the back of my mind, that's something that I have to be conscious of, that, as a child from that situation, no matter how much money I have, there's always in the back of my mind that, could I be on the street or kicked out, or will I have enough?
Hmm.
So it's that constant question of, do I have enough? But I say that because that's one way that, experiencing addiction, it did inform my view, my perspective as a child. But also domestic abuse, that was something I experienced as well. Well, I was privy to, I'll say, as well, and um, it formed my view of relationships, that, and to the point where I felt that, if relationship looked like this and this was supposed to be a loving relationship, it was not something. Relationships were not something I wanted in general,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to be abused.
Yeah.
And from that, how to communicate my emotional needs, boundaries, um, relearning how to do that, and that it's okay to desire a safe space emotionally, psychologically, and to pursue that in a relationship if I
Yeah.
were to take that risk.
Yeah. Like I definitely got like I definitely can I definitely can relate to that. Of those moments. And I think even if we dive a little deeper into like how like how our grandparents or our great grandparents and like how society was back then, and how they played the role into like how they play a role into the feminist movement, how they played a role into how they play a role into the independent family, like how they play how they played a role into like the individual, like the independent woman, and all these other topics that's brought up from that. Because like if we truly think about it, like not like I literally say about 50 to 60 years ago, there was multiple times when people be like, you just gotta keep the family together, you gotta stick through it no matter what happens in the family. But a lot of times our great grandparents were getting abused by their partners.
Mhm.
And so and I think what's even crazier is like we hear a lot of times, especially in the Black community, we hear a lot of times of like this thing of we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it.
Mhm.
You keep this in the family. You keep it in the family. And a lot of those things that we keep it in the family is abuse, is sexual assault. Is
Mhm.
like our cousin Johnny going to grandma's room and taking money out her wallet to pay for drugs. And we see these things and we just never talk about it. And so even now we see so many people like I wonder how relationships stayed why how come our grandparents' relationship stayed together for so long. And it's just like and a lot of people like well, because they stick through thick and thin, when in reality there was just like if they left, where are they going?
Exactly.
They don't have a bank account.
Exactly.
They like they don't have a bank account, they don't have really a name to really build anything off of. So it's like where are they going? Like great and even our great granddads like they knew those things. And so they're like, you're not going nowhere. And they used to do awful stuff. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
yes. And
Yeah, yeah, I'm
okay.
sorry, but yeah, I so concur with that on so many levels, especially, that whole just paradigm of, hey, what happens in the house stays in the house. We're not going to let anybody out. And one of the things that I do is, I work with families and I work with young adults within the family, and I feel that sometimes it's almost like, well, I'm not going to talk to a therapist. It's almost considered a badge of courage. I'm hard enough, or I can bear the burden of this, and I don't need anybody.
Yeah.
It's and it's almost like I said, it's a badge of courage. But we know that they do need that extra support, but they've learned generationally, even from their parents and their parents, that hey, if I talk to a therapist or see someone to get it out, I may be crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm crazy, is that how is that going to be taken? If someone knows that, if someone even sees
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. And I think that's so fascinating because it is like, oh, I'm in therapy right now. I get this nice little outlet where I can like say whatever I want, talk about whatever I want. And then afterwards, it's like, okay, I'm going now, I gotta get back into the mindset of I can't talk about it. I can't
Yeah,
talk about it. I can't talk about this. And I think that's so I think it's so interesting. I'm about to say fascinating. That we still navigate and still deal with that. And I think it is a shackle, and I think that is a mindset that has been challenged a lot. And I think that's why this new generation that's coming up who challenge that mindset a lot of older generations are like, oh, they're just rude, like they don't understand society. But in reality, it's like, no, they definitely understand society. This is just things that we have been trying. These are generational traumas that we've been breaking so often that it's becoming to a point where it's like we, the new generation, like we don't like this. Like
yeah,
prime example, spanking. I think spanking and whoopings are one of the most controversial generational traumas that have been passed along generation. And as a black person, as a black man, I truly believe that whoopings and spankings are things that truly are traumas from slavery. Especially in the black community, because where do we see whooping kids or bringing physical harm to kids to change their behaviors? Like,
yeah,
where do we even see that? Like, I truly believe we saw that in as slaves. Like, we saw that as we used to like our ancestors from a long to like from like 400 years ago saw like saw literally like, hey, if we want to survive this, we
yeah,
have to like stay in line. And how did the masters keep them in line? They used to whip them. They used to
Exactly.
whip them, or if they whipped them, or they didn't whip them, they used to torture those. They used to torture our ancestors. They used to torture those people, and I think it's so. I think it's so sad that the one thing that we brought out of that we kept, and we kept
Yeah.
doing it to our kids and kids was whooping them. I remember getting whooped with a switch
Yeah.
and feeling so inhuman in that moment of like, what have I done that's so wrong that I have to go outside, pick a switch just to get hit with it?
Yeah.
Like it it messed with me for a minute. And I think it was even crazy because like we'll go to school the next day, or I used to go to school the next day and be like, yeah, man, I got whooped. And like all my friends like, man, you know, we get whoopings all the time. And it was
Yeah.
such a normal thing. It was such
Yeah.
a normal thing of you do something wrong, I'm gonna whoop you. Or
Mhm.
and then as my parents got older, they went from whooping to, and as they learned also, they went from whooping to punishment. Uh and those punishments were like taking games away, taking things away from me. And I'm gonna be honest, I love that better. And I feel like my behavior changed more from that than from getting a whoop. Um, but that is something that I truly believe, because I used to hear my dad say, I used to get whoopings and look at me, I turned out fine.
Yeah.
And
And
I
that,
hear even people say it now. I used to get whoopings. I turned out fine. I'm good. And it's like, but that I think that is one of the few things I'm like, as I got older, I was like, I won't do to my children of whoopings, because it's like I feel like that is one of the few things that we as a black community holds on to that is very, I don't want to say, I think it's very oppressive to the next generation of you've done something, because it tells a child you've done something so bad that I have to cause physical harm on you. After we tell kids, don't hit people, like don't, or even better, don't hit me, don't hit your parent, but me as the parent, I can hit you. and
exactly.
and then after doing that, they be like, after they get done with you, they're like, this harm, this hurt me more than it hurts you.
Yeah. And and I, I so concur with what you're saying. And I think some of it may even be tied to, some people's beliefs, where,
Mm-hmm.
in the Bible says, spare the rod. If you spare the rod, then the child will be,
Yeah.
basically, not. And then even in that, I feel like everything from the Bible is not necessarily literal.
Yeah.
We do have to, use some wisdom, make some experience. But I love that you brought that in, and and the fact that so often, and it's not just in the Black community, but in our community, especially that aggression is normalized. It is.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes it's normalized to the fact that how can you with a straight face tell your child not to hit someone or even not to hit you back? And I can see that in some relationships with families and children where
Yeah.
where the kids will get to an age where they're like they've been taught, this is what we do, so they start hitting the parent back, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they learn, and then as they progress and they become parents themselves, because that was the only way they were taught to discipline children, they do that instinctively, not even thinking about what effect it had on them or what effect it could have on their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so interesting that that is something that we don't ever really think about until now. Like I really say, I do think as we got older, as we got older, as we learned more, our parents also learned more, and our parents was like, oh, so this is probably not the best thing to do.
Yeah.
Uh, and because I vividly remember when my parents stopped whipping me. And I remember when they stopped. I remember because there was just like it was got to a point, like you said, like the if you like the religion aspect of whippings, like spoil the world, like spare the rod, spoil the child, which I don't like, which I also heard that a lot too. And like, my parents say that as a badge of honor too. Like, look, we spare the rod, we spoil you, and we don't want you spoiled. It's just like what? But I think that plays another role, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about it too. I think that plays a huge role into, especially in the Black community, where they also felt like if my child
Mhm.
messed up, they're done. Society will see them as this aggressive person, or
Exactly.
society. Like I have to make sure my child
Mhm.
stays in line with society
Mhm.
because society is cruel to my child.
Exactly. Yeah, and as a parent, I understand that so much. And actually, this week, and be personal, I actually received a phone call from my daughter, who's normally a perfect, that's straight A by her teacher's account student, but I received the phone call, and the teacher told me, what was going on, and basically there was a part of me, that was almost hyper vigilant in that I wanted to just ensure that, like you said, that her behavior was in line with expectations, because I don't want her to experience that. Um, I guess that perception by the teachers or by administration that she's one that does not follow the rules,
Mm-hmm.
or doesn't, I guess, just keep the line going, because I want her to have the best experience. So I guess in a way, it can be, even taken wrong, it can be, like, just an attempt to protect the child. But by protecting them, you may not, in terms of when there's trauma involved, then it may not be protecting at all. It actually could cause more trauma.
Yeah,
So just being cognizant of that.
yeah. I definitely understand that. Because like I think that also goes into how each generation even views poverty, and how they feel like, dang, if my child messes up here, you're gonna end up like me. Like, because growing up, my dad always told me, he's like, Jonathan, I want you to go off. He's he'll come home and he like, or I do something bad in school, or I mess up with on assignments, and he'll just sit down and show me his hands, and like show me all the scars he has from working in a warehouse, and he'll be like, Jonathan, like, I don't want you to end up like me. Uh, and like working really hard and doing all these things. I want you to go off and do big things. And so even with that, growing up in a state of poverty, like because so growing up, I never thought it was, never thought it. And then my mom them always told me, they were like, we're not poor. Like, we got money, we got a house, we have food. You never go out of meal, like our lights on, all our bills get paid. We're not poor. And that for the most part, most of that stayed true. Most of that stayed true. But there'll be moments where something happened and like lights go off. Something
Yeah.
happened. And like, cause even I'll never forget when we moved one time, we moved out of a apartment complex.
Mhm.
And my dad was always like, oh yeah, we didn't like the office staff, whatever. Like we just moved to a different place. As I got older, I will say, I think I was like 20, 23. Mind you, this happened in 2001 when we moved. 23, I found out um we it was either we move or get evicted.
Mhm.
And that plays a huge role for me because I know me personally, I'm like, if there's anything that's gonna happen, all my bills gonna get paid. I'm never
Yeah,
gonna be late on anything.
exactly.
Can't happen.
Yeah,
Can't do
yeah.
it. Can't be
And,
late.
and no, I agree with you because and I felt like I was trying to touch on this when I was talking about the homelessness,
Mhm.
as a child, for me, like I said, it's that always that nagging voice. I have to, have those things, those necessities, and if for some reason that it doesn't, it just produces some anxiety, a lot of anxiety. Well, of course, I know normal anxiety would produce, but for me, I feel like, it's something that, I have to control and be like, hey, even no matter if I have however much money in the bank, it's
Mhm.
still a kind of underlying concern. Like,
Yeah.
are my basic needs going to be met this month?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yes. Like it's so important. It's so like it's so important to the point where I sit back, I'm like, so my bills are literally pay for my rent, pay my light bill, uh get food, and then after that, wherever falls, it falls. But those three things has to happen because the one thing I'm not trying to do is have my lights off, get evicted, or uh, or not have food. Like, but there's multiple times where I know a lot of people don't have food or like they go through that. And like, cause I think prime example, I was listening to a book. I don't remember the book, but they was talking about how in New York City, um, how like when someone lives in like what I don't want to talk I don't want to say the projects because I always feel like that's such a when they live in assisted housing, like they said, like there was a grandmother living in one place, living in the assisted home. Then like right like across the hall was her mom, was the mother, and then up one floor was the mother's daughter. So three
yeah,
generations
and
of living in poverty and living in that thing of living in that sense of, and I think I always tell people like a lot of people like I do this because I want housing security, and like it's so important, especially in today's age where it literally feels that corporations and it literally feels like all these things are literally doing everything in their power to make sure people don't have housing
yeah,
or make sure people don't have money to do anything. So that's three generations living the same lifestyle
mhm,
that the previous generation lived.
yeah,
And and like so it's like so now you're bringing up a new generation because I think the mom had a kid. So now that mom is bringing up a new generation, and if it's the only thing you know,
yeah,
that child is going to be raised and be like, oh, they're going to probably get one extra thing and be like, hey, at least I'm not doing that.
exactly. Or
Yeah.
I like that you said, just and they some of the reason might be just for security, for and it may be, hey, I could possibly go to school. I could possibly leave here, and
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if you've known, but I've known family members who, where it could they really could, take a step in their career, get another job, or just to have a different quality of living. But
Mm-hmm.
there's always that underlying fear that if I make too much, if I make more than a specific dollar an hour, they're going to cut my benefits, or they're going to make me start paying for housing. So, and I can't lose those things. So, I got to stay right here,
Yeah.
financially, educationally, because, if, I get beyond that, I'm afraid. And like I said, I think it's because, they've seen generation after generation before
Mm-hmm.
them, that was their security. So if I take that security blanket away, then I am really at risk, and I'm really not going to have what I need.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And and I think that's always the hardest part. Like you said, I think you make a great point of like if I take that leap, if I take that leap, it's like what if I fall? And now I'm in a worse situation than I was before.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly.
and that is terrifying. That is so terrifying. And I understand people being scared of that. Because there's so many times you hear people are just lazy, people just don't want to work, and people don't want. I'm like, no, no, it's not even that. It's because they've seen what it looks like to fail. Ooh, that's good. They a lot of times they see what it looks like to fail, and they're like, I cannot afford to fail.
Yeah. I gotta
I
stay.
don't have the luxury. I don't have the safety net. I don't have the things in place where if I fail, it's like, oh, I can go back home. Or, oh, I can just pick up here. Or I can go get a loan. No, they don't have that. If they fail, that's it. Like if they fail, they're like my child
Mhm.
is on the streets.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because there is a lot of times people can't go. A lot of times, like the older generations, like I made. Oh, that's another thing. The older generations, like, oh, I made it. You can make it too. Pull yourself up
Exactly.
by your bootstraps and keep it pushing, because you ain't coming back to my house.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that and that I feel like it can, it can perpetuate so many things of poverty because you see some communities that, they are not simply nuclear. They're, they build and you may have several generations they're living together, but, they're building until, maybe until there's a point where maybe they can go out on their own, but it's not at 18, boom, you're eating up too much food, you're using too much light, so you got to go,
yeah,
and then you better figure it out.
yeah.
So,
And I think what's even crazy is like, and then once they do that, they're like, okay, now y'all go out there and have grandkids. And then the grandkids, they like, oh, the grandkids can stay with me anytime they want to. It's like, what about me? What about me? And I think that's a big thing that my parents do so well at. Like, I vividly remember one time I was really struggling, really struggling. I was like, Mom, Dad, I don't think I'm gonna be able to stay here. And my parents, mind you, this is a 2 bedroom apartment. They're doing the best they can. I was like, it's 6 of us. My mom then was like, you can always come back home. You
yeah.
always have a place here. Like, and I think that's something that um I think that's something that my family, both and this is both generations, have done really well with. Even my grandma, they're like, you can always live here. You can always come home. And I think that's so important to have because that, and I know I'm really blessed to have that because there are some people who don't. There's some people who's like, uh, yeah, no, you can't come home. Like, don't even think about it. Or like, I can't help you. You're on your own. And like, so I know that's something that a lot of people deal with. I know that's something that a lot of people try to navigate. Um, and I know that's sometimes rooted in like I can't have you. Because I think there was another moment I heard somebody say like the reason why I'm hard on my children, the reason I'm hard on them is because I can't have them being weak.
Yeah.
I in a
Yeah.
world where the world is, I think I said this earlier, where the world is cruel. You
Yeah.
can't be weak out here, and you coming home and not figuring it out on your own to like make you look like just shows me that you're not prepared. And I just think I'm like, or they just need a little place to stay to feel,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and like you said, that's a perpetuation because likely that person, that mom and dad were told that by their mom and dad. So
mm-hmm,
they have been in that survival mindset for their whole life. So they're like, trying to prepare their child to be also in that survival
mm-hmm,
mindset. So, but rather than,
mm-hmm.
offering resources that might be needed in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you even talked about this earlier with the criminal justice system and how that also um, is really impacted by generational trauma. Like um, there are so many people in jail due to the previous generation going to jail, due to the previous generation going there too.
Yeah.
Like I think, like I said, I feel like I watch a lot of documentaries. I saw one documentary that was talking about like how a father, how a granddad, and how the father's son were all in jail together. We're all in prison.
Yeah.
Each of them was in prison for doing the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like how, how do you navigate that as a parent? Like, yeah, how do you navigate that as a parent? How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Like to see your child and your grandchild in prison due to the same thing that you did too. So I don't know. Uh and they always say the moment you go in once, you're normally always gonna be going in a lot.
Yes.
I think that's what
Totally.
studies say. Like you go in once, you typically end up going multiple times. Um, because like you go in and especially you go in for a certain for a charge, you everything is taken away from you, and you don't know what outside life looks like. And if you see your
Yeah.
dad, and like let's say you're a child, you go in and see your dad, and your dad's always telling you don't end up here, don't end up here. But then once again, now you've been raised in like a single parent household or being raised by grandparents, and now you're also dealing with poverty where now you're like, I have to make money to provide for the family, or then and then from there, you sometimes end up in certain situations where you get caught and now you end up in prison too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that, no, go for
I'm
it.
sorry.
No, no, it's
No, I
fine.
was saying I completely concur with that, for sure. Everything that you're saying, um, and from all the effects that you see. Just I guess to move us along a little bit, I was just thinking about, because there's so many examples of generational trauma that we've stated personally, and then also as societally. Are there or is there a way that generational trauma can be mitigated or I won't say eradicated, but at least a lesson in our society? Is there something that we can do to help that individually?
Mm.
And for me, I was thinking about several things that I may be able to do. Is one thing is I feel like doing something that we're doing now. I feel like it's education, it's raising awareness through public discourse, just talking about um, generational trauma and how it does affect our generations and how it may lead to a negative effects overall. Also, our support systems by developing, expanding on the mental health system to address the needs of those that experience that type of trauma. But healing practices, and that's therapy, offering therapy, counseling, support groups that also will acknowledge generational trauma. And then by when we see areas where in our society right now where generational trauma may be shown or displayed, like as far as discrimination and equality, that we might say something about it, we may speak up about it, address it, whether it's in a private discourse, public discourse. But also I was thinking too, to being open to having that discourse, that conversation between from generation to generation, from going back to your mom, your grandmother, if they're still available, they're still open to having that discussion about what's going on in the family. You know, what happened to Uncle such and so, and your dad and your mom. You know, how that the things that they experience, how they how might they affect what I'm experiencing today, you know. And even if they can't voice it or communicate it in that way, maybe we just make that connection, just learning from them, their experience and what they say to us.
Yeah, I think you hit all of it on the head. And I think as also as a society, not running away from that history, like not silencing that history, because as a society, we as a whole has went through a lot of generational trauma. And a lot of times we hear about certain ones, like we hear about 9/11, we hear about the Holocaust, we hear about the Great Depression, we hear about both world wars. Um, we hear and like we hear a lot about those situations and those events that were terrible. Each and every one of them caused trauma to a level that has impacted generations to come. And will all, and I feel like a lot of them will stay impacting more and more generations. Um, but like we also have to talk about what happened to indigenous people. Like really talk about that. And not just give us the Trail of Tears, talk about Manifest Destiny, like, but really talk about the impact of the genocide that happened to that group of people. Really talk about slavery,
Yeah,
not the cookie cutter stuff, but really talk about those things. What happened? Talk about Jim Crow. Talk about um, like even right now with the wars that are going on with Ukraine and Russia and Palestine and Israel. Really talk about those traumas that happen there, because those don't just happen in a vacuum of like, oh, this happened here. No, there's upon generation of trauma that's going on in those situations.
exactly.
Like, and then we even have a situation that happened recently of COVID and the world shutting down. What is the impact that that's going to look for even more generations to come? Like, so really talking about and educating people on what these events are,
Hmm.
how these events happen, and what will these events lead, and how these events lead to what's happening now.
Exactly.
Because a lot of times we do this thing where we get kind of like kind of almost kind of like this point of like numb to it. And when we get numb to it, it's like, okay, we're numb. It's or it happened so long ago, it's not having an impact on things. When there's a reason why highways go through neighborhoods. There's a reason why the black community in America don't have houses like us, like other
Yeah,
communities do. There's a reason why reservations are really small in certain places in America. Um, like there's reasons why all these things happen. It's not they're not just vacuums. They're not just oh like these people are like no. The every single thing that happened in history has an impact on the next generation to come. And I
exactly.
think it's so important that we truly, as a society, as individual people, don't forget that. And also don't forget that even on top of all those things, individuals also are dealing with their own trauma that they
Exactly.
are also navigating based off of their grandparents, parents, great grandparents, people you never met before, even and then also outside like friends, because we didn't talk about we really didn't get the chance to talk about how friends and how loss and how those things can also bring uh like because your friends also have generation trauma they're dealing with, and they also try to navigate that too. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
like and like how friends play a role in trauma of like, oh, I guess well I don't trust everybody because if I trust everybody, like they're gonna leave me like your friend did, like my best friend did. And it's like, okay.
I don't trust women, I don't talk to women now because
Oh yeah, or all men ain't nothing.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
like that's trauma. Like it's fascinating. Like I have to say that's like Trump generation trauma is such a topic that has so many weaves and roundabouts in it that we as a generation should talk about a lot more. So I definitely agree with you on that. So I think we talked about like um we said like what are some ways that we as a people like we do our best to break that, or like what
Mhm.
how can we mitigate it. So I think the next question for me to you would be, how are you breaking generational trauma that's been passed along to you?
Okay, that's a great question, Jonathan. So, and I feel like, and I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but for me, a large part of it is just doing my own work. It's recognizing my own patterns, and I really, and I, I've heard this saying, and I know you have, but every therapist needs their own therapist, and that's to kind of just help you be able to process those things, to have that safe space to talk about, what's going on. I'm seeing these patterns, maybe at the moment I may not know where they're coming from, but they can help me to make that connection. Journaling, that's one thing I like a lot because I can look back through my journals and it helps me actually um, to bring out those emotions, but also I can look back 5 years, 10 years from later and see the growth that's happened. Support groups, I love groups because I feel like groups give you an opportunity to learn from so many different people and their experience. So that those are some things that I just do personally. But also for me, just having that open dialogue with my siblings, with family members I know about, what happened over time, so that I can understand. I guess even myself, my history, where some of those traumas have come from, or even some negative mindsets where they originated at. So for me, primarily, it's just doing my own work. It's like I said, it's journaling, it's reading, it's listening to podcasts, it's being open and willing when I learn something new to embrace it, even if it's painful at first. And I think about Resma's book, my grandmother's hands when I think about that. Just being introduced to that in college, and just about just understanding our bodies and the type of stress that our bodies are under. When we go through different experiences, and how to learn to listen to our bodies and make that response. And so that normal everyday response, normal everyday activities that may cause stress, especially if maybe you've had some ACEs, or maybe you've had traumatic. Well, everybody's had traumatic experience, but even through those traumatic experiences, being able to recognize how that feels in your body, to process it, and to communicate it in a way that's healthy for you, and then ultimately for your children, or for whomever lives you touch.
Yeah, that's great. That's an amazing answer, and I love that. I love that you're doing all those. I love that you're doing all those and doing all those techniques and learning so much about it. Like I know for me, I am slowly learning more about how to navigate trauma, and especially generational trauma. I definitely agree with you on that statement of every therapist needs a therapist. I tell my clients who I see all the time. They're like, "I'm in therapy." I'm like, "I am too. I am too."
Exactly.
uh, trust me. Uh, and it's great, like because I am learning how to navigate a lot of the trauma that I dealt with. And even for me, learning about my trauma is very important. Because a lot of times I used to just think, oh, this has happened to me. It happens to everybody. It's okay. It's keep it moving. But I realized a lot of hurt and a lot of pain has come from me navigating that trauma and me keeping that trauma in, and has played a role in a lot of other things that are going on in my life today. Um, from relationships and learning a lot more about what loves look like, and like also learning that I can't impress everybody. I can't impress everyone, and I cannot me personally, I cannot be this person that can overgive from an empty cup. So I do that a lot because
Yeah,
that's what I learned from my parents. Of you just give until you can't give no more, and it's like, oh, it's tiring. It's very
yeah,
tiring to do that. So I know for me, I today, like when we was getting ready for this, you told me about my grandmother's hands, and I'm definitely like, that's a book I'm about to put on my list. I'm gonna pay for. I'm gonna buy it off Amazon. Well, not buy it. Go find a bookstore because Amazon is something
yeah.
else. Well, Amazon's beautiful. I love Amazon so much. It's not Amazon ads, so don't even think about it. But it's like I definitely want to read that book because I definitely want to work on my trauma. Like, or even prime example today, like call my mom getting ready to do this talk. And my mom was like, well, make sure you talk about this other trauma that's going on. I'm like, I don't know about that. She's like, oh, my bad. Excuse me. So I think for me, a lot of things I'm doing is definitely like sitting with myself, like sitting in quiet. Because I tend to like live in a loud environment, like to make sure I can't sit with my thoughts. So sitting in my quietness, journaling, writing, asking questions, um, to learn more about like why my parents do what they did, or like why my grandparents did what they did, so I can understand myself more. Um, and so I can grasp, so I can get a better grasp on what my generational trauma looks like, so
Mhm,
that when I do have kids, I can break that down, or talk to my partner and figure out what her generational trauma is, so that we can both work on it together, so that we make sure that when we do
mhm.
eventually have kids and do raise the next generation that's coming up, that they are not dealing with our trauma that we have from our parents, um and like putting that in them, and be so they also have to deal with it, like whenever they turn
Exactly.
25 and be sitting there like, oh, I did this for
Yeah.
but I also know we have to show ourselves grace too, because we're also human, and we also learn from things that our parents taught us. And we have to show ourselves grace of being like, hey, there are going to be certain things that might slip through the cracks that our children might deal with. Um, and realize like, hey, we didn't mean for it to happen. And only thing we can do after that is talk to them about it, so they can also understand what they're like, what they're navigating, how they feel about that, and not feel attacked about them asking
Exactly.
those questions. So, yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with so much of what you're saying. I can definitely relate for sure.
Mhm.
So we've had, and Jonathan, thank you. We've had such a great discussion about just generational trauma. I wanted to do just a short recap, just so that we can refer back to what we spoke on. But we did speak about some evidence that we saw of generational trauma in our society, and we mentioned some things around family relationship dynamics, the criminal justice system, socioeconomic disparities, substance abuse. We talked a little bit about our own personal experiences with trauma and what that looked like and how we were affected by that and how it affects the way that we move today and or our experience as a child. We also talked about how we can as individuals, as an adults, mitigate the effects of generational trauma, both in society, but also through our own personal lives. So those are some things that we talked about as far as generational trauma. And Jonathan, I believe that you have some resources that could be of help as well.
Yeah, I definitely do. Like, so some of the resources, like some great readings that you could definitely check out is Emotional Inheritance by Galet Atlas. My Grandmother's Hands. Hey, once again, I'm buying that book soon, so check it out. By Resma McKean. Walking the Tiger, Healing Trauma by Peter Levin. What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma by Stephanie Fu. Decolonizing Trauma Work, Indigenous Stories and Strategies by Renee Later. The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in Healing of Trauma by Besse van der Kolk. That's a name. That's a name.
Yeah, yes,
Uh,
yeah.
Resilience and survival, understanding the healing intergenerational trauma by Claire Musi. We also have a couple podcasts that I personally will listen to also, from Conversations from the Couch, Breaking the Cycle and Understanding Intergenerational Trauma. And another one I'm going to plan to listen to is What We Inherited, from Code Switch. I think these are like, so please check them out if you want to learn more about generational trauma, and or just trauma in general. And trust me, I'm definitely gonna check them out myself too, because this is a topic that I kind of finally got more into, like wanting to understand a little bit more. So yeah, definitely check them out.
Definitely. Thank you for Jonathan. Those are some excellent resources, and some I have been privileged to read myself, so I know they can really, really help us to see, to understand our own patterns, but also to give us an avenue for healing. So those are some wonderful resources. So we want to just wrap up with you guys, and but to do that, just we want to thank you for tuning in to this month's edition of News Conscious Conversations. We hope you were inspired, uplifted, and empowered. If you have any questions, reflections, or feedback, we want to hear from you. Feel free to leave us a comment or reach out to us via email at contact or Katrica or Jonathan at newcounselingpllc.com.
It is our goal to equip you with the tools to be the best version of yourself. Everyone needs a safe supportive space that will allow them to reconnect with themselves. If you ever need any additional support, we're here for you. We'll see you next time. And take care of yourself and each other. Bye.